Hello, and welcome to the Crypto Beat. My name's Tim Copeland, and I'm the blog's editor-in-chief. Joining me today, we have Ethos Labs co-founder and CEO, Trevor Thompson. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Hey, Tim, I'm doing great. How are you, man?
Awesome. Yeah, doing well, thank you. So before we get started, I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Awaken, a crypto tax software provider. Make sure to use the code TheCryptoBeat for $25 free credit. Now, today's episode is about reputation scores. So in recent weeks, it's been pretty crazy in crypto. We've had the Argentinian president launching a meme coin that got, rugged, or at least $100 million removed from liquidity. You have Melania Trump launching a meme coin apparently with the same team. Dave Portnoy launching meme coins. Is all of this making the case for reputation scores in crypto?
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting to see some of the things that are happening. And I think one of the biggest things that both you and I know is the space tends to have the memory of a goldfish. And I'd like to say that we, at least at the very least, need a better way of documenting some of these things that happen. And it's even cooler to think about what if you could document some of the ways these things happen and actually turn it into some sort of quantifiable way to measure reputation.
So what is Ethos then?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what we're doing. It's great lead in. Ethos is basically trying to take reputation, take credibility, put it on chain, make it something that's observable, and ultimately turn it into a score, a way to quantifiably get a better understanding of who to trust and maybe who to avoid. Um, we started out about a year ago, and the concept is pretty simple. You leave reviews for people, positive, negative, or neutral. But also, we have the idea of vouching, which is like staking your ETH in someone to and like boost someone's reputation even more. And slashing, which means if you step out of line, just like in proof of stake, you have the potential of having financial downside or social downside. That's kind of the general concept of Ethos.
Okay, so is it like more of a Web 2 product in terms of just sort of straight reviews, or is it? Do you see it fundamentally as like a Web 3 product because it's so sort of integrated with crypto?
Yeah, I mean, like the Web 2 part of it is just like, hey, I left a review, positive, negative, or neutral. It's kind of like if you got out of an Uber and you left a review for another anonymous driver. But the way that it fits in with Web 3 again is more on the like vouching or staking side of things. We think that as much as it would be very easy for someone to spam millions of reviews on each other, like we see a lot of Sybil and farming spam in the space right now, we kind of need that concept of economic security in a lot of ways. And bringing that to the way that reputation works is a pretty critical part of how ethos works too. And so staking your ETH in someone and saying, hey, not only do I believe in you, Tim, as someone who I enjoy working with and someone who I trust, it's like I'm gonna actually put some of the money that I have and stake it in your name. That helps you boost your credibility, but it also gives me the chance of financial downside if I'm wrong or if I did something personally that I got slashed for. And so these primitives, I would say, of ethos are very much like proof of stake, and the main difference would be we believe that humans are kind of validators instead of nodes on a network.
Okay, so if you vouch for someone, I kind of understand what happens if they do something bad. Like,
hmm
obviously, they get sort of slashed, and then your vouch becomes worth less. That makes sort of sense. What happens in like the opposite in terms of if you vouch for someone and they do really, really well? Like, do you make money out of that or not?
Yeah, actually, right now there is a part of the system that not a lot of people realize. If you're someone that's early to vouch for someone, you actually get a tiny amount of reward for all of the vouchers that come after you. So like 4% is distributed to earlier vouchers, which is kind of a way to just like hat tip the people that were early in terms of finding credibility in people. I think a lot of the value that will come from people that are vouching people early or identifying good people that maybe haven't been identified as reputable yet will come more in kind of social status. It's the like, hey, you were early to say Tim was a good guy before he did anything, or hey, you were early to say XYZ, call someone out similarly. And I think, that being able to put all of that on chain and make it super observable is something that means that people can get value out of that side of it too. So a little bit of both, I would say. Minor financial reward, but I think the social signaling will be really cool to be able to go back and look at.
Is there any point to vouching for someone that has like a super high reputation?
Yeah, I mean, if you really just want to get XP on Ethos because you think it's worth getting, then it's a pretty safe bet to vouch for someone that's already been vouched. But to be honest, like the way we've designed the incentive model is to support more of a distributed approach where like you actually do have incentive to vouch for people that haven't been vouched before. The 4% early voucher incentive doesn't apply if you're the first person that vouched because there's no one before you. So a lot of the mechanism design that we've thought about is intended to encourage people to spread vouchers out as opposed to necessarily vouching in just reputable people. So I'd say I like to think that we've put a lot of thought into that because I think if everyone just vouched for the same notable people, we wouldn't really achieve the goal that we're trying to achieve, which is anyone can build up their reputation, whether it be vouching or getting reviews.
Yeah, so you're trying to create sort of upside in vouching for reputable people, creating the incentive for at least some sort of like small critical mass per person. You mentioned XP, so what's that and sort of how does that have a sort of a purpose or use in the platform?
Yeah, so XP right now is kind of the easiest way to think about it, be something like Reddit Karma. If you're someone who is creating trust signals for Ethos, and what I mean by trust signals, it's like you're vouching for someone, you're reviewing someone, maybe you're doing your daily tasks where you go upvote and downvote, or maybe you've just posted a review that got a bunch of upvotes, or you're reputable yourself. There are a bunch of different ways that you can earn that XP. And again, I kind of think about it as like a nod to someone who is providing trust signals. It's you are saying I trust this person, and you're actually creating value when you do that, whether you know it or not. If Tem, you write a review for me, like that creates other value for other people to go observe. And so right now that is the functional use case of XP. It's just a nod to people that are kind of providing those social signals. Of course, we have plans for ways to integrate that deeper into the product in the future. But I think it's working pretty well so far from what we've seen. The people that are really out there, like trying to write a lot of reviews, they're getting upvotes, they're building that XP up. And again, it's kind of a social signal in itself of like someone who is contributing.
So is it akin to sort of a points program? And then is it potentially are you planning like a token launch at some point?
Yeah, I would say it's pretty similar to a points program. I think points programs are definitely underrated in a lot of ways in terms of being a way to experiment with like absolutely off-chain yield. It's not actual yield, but it helps you understand how in the future, if you had an incentivization model that included yield, you'd be able to apply that. I can't talk much about a potential token launch because we don't really know what that looks like yet, but we do feel really good about learning from this points program and being able to say, this is the behavior we did want to reward through contributor XP, or oh, these are the things that didn't get rewarded enough. Like maybe if someone's slashing, we didn't get that reward system down, and we should have been better with that. It gives us the opportunity before anything like that happened to observe and learn and modify, understand that potential yield better.
And why did you decide to build this in the beginning?
Yeah, good question. It's kind of a two-folded story. It starts with a lot of the stuff that I think most of us has seen in crypto overall. We see bad actors or people that are coming into this space that often kind of extract value, and they're doing it with their reputation, right? If you looked at someone like the president of Argentina, he has reputation. That's the only reason people bought the token because he has reputation. But we tend to forget about these things. And I think in the last cycle, I personally got pretty frustrated with how easy it was for people to forget things and how unaccountable we were for each other. And I realized it was basically a massive, is a massive, there's no way that crypto is going to grow if extraction is the primary thing that's happening. Because when you invite your buddy to join crypto and the first thing he does is buy the Trump coin at $50 billion, or he buys the Argentina coin, he's not going to come back after that. And so, if we want to be really good about retaining users in crypto and retaining money into traders' hands, like someone has to solve this problem. That's the first part of it. The second part is I really was inspired by Friend.tech, and it sounds crazy knowing how Friend.tech ended, but Friend.tech originally I thought showed us the first glimpse of could you do credibility on chain. And what happened with Friend.tech is people were farming Friend.tech. They'd say one thing on Twitter. They'd say, "Oh, come buy my key. If you buy my key, we'll 3-3 together and we'll farm and do all of these things." And you wake up the next morning and they've like sold all of their keys and dumped on you and exited, and they took the not 3-3 route. They took the 5-0 route or whatever. And it was crazy because that's the first time we've ever seen your Twitter account connected to your wallet. Like the things that you say actually connected with what you do. And I looked at that opportunity. I was like, wow, that's super interesting. Like if we have this way of kind of measuring it and extend it to other social signals like our review system or being able to vouch or slash someone, then you might actually be able to, in a very on-chain first way, solve this problem of credibility. And so I'd say it's like a combination of like feeling inspired by the problem and then seeing a glimpse of the solution potentially with Friend.tech.
I liked some of the Friend.tech clones that experimented a little bit more
Hmm.
with sort of more financial tools. I remember one of them, you actually had an inbuilt mechanism for 3-3
Right.
so that you each buy each other's tokens and it's locked up for a certain period of time. And I thought some of the things there were super interesting. And your point about linking identities with these sorts of like apps interactions and stuff. I mean, we saw that a lot with Kaito recently,
Yeah.
and sort of everyone like monitoring like who sold, who held. That's getting super interesting. What would you have done differently for Friend.tech? Let's say if you were like running it.
It's really interesting. I think what Friend.tech V2 had was really interesting, where you had these clubs that you could buy and they had a token and everything was like, under built on this underlying token. And what was fascinating about that is, again, it was more like trading, and it was trading with your Twitter account associated with it. And I felt like, I mean, the opportunity that was lost is they never really went hard on like, how do you kind of tie the credibility pieces into Friend.tech? Like, if you have a trading app, it's interesting and novel. It was a walled garden. You literally couldn't trade anything outside of Friend.tech. You could have actually still tied a lot more social side of that back into it. And I think you would have a more interesting trading product, honestly. If you look at like what Vector is doing, Vector has a great mobile app. It is very social first. Whenever you go sign up, you get an invite, you're connecting your Twitter, you can broadcast the things that you buy. And it is meant to be social forward almost, where when you buy stuff, like you have a little bit of accountability, but you also have skin in the game. Like you can say, I bought this thing, and if you buy it, I'll get, a percentage of your fees. And so I felt like Friend.tech could have gone further down the kind of like credibility route, like what we're doing. And I would argue we're an evolution of that in a lot of ways, or and how I originally thought of Friend.tech. And so I did. Like we went and started a business to go do what we thought Friend.tech wouldn't do. But I also thought that they were onto something in terms of trading and the social aspects of trading and some of the other products that we've seen come out in the past year or so. They were early to a lot of that thought. And I feel like I would have loved to see them actually, stick around and build that out a little bit, but ultimately they didn't.
Yeah, it is curious how like transparency has been kind of a thing within crypto. Um, it's sort of gone well in crypto. So like even with blockchains, they're pretty transparent to begin with, and that transparency was what helped enable such sort of like a permissionless system. And
Hmm.
then you sort of see it a bit where a lot of stuff sort of happening behind the scenes, people get very angry about. But if you're sort of open and forthcoming, people don't care so much. Like even with Dave Portnoy, he's sort of broadcasting everything he's doing. And sure, he's getting like criticized for some stuff, but he actually, I think a lot of people prefer that
Hmm.
to all the stuff we've seen over like the last number of years, where people will be shilling things left, right, and center that they have secret investments in.
Totally. I mean, one of the quotes that I say probably way too much is happiness equals expectations minus reality. And what Dave did that was different is he set expectations, right? He was very clear and explicit about what he was doing. And unfortunately on Ethos, his score doesn't look too great right now. He has like 79 reviews and they're all negative. And so like the space doesn't quite understand that nuance or hasn't applied that nuance to how they reviewed him. Um, which is a problem in itself that we have to figure out over time too. But yeah, it's just really interesting to see how that kind of plays out. And um yeah, the Dave one is a really good example of there's a lot of nuance in what he did. Whereas like a lot of other people are kind of acting implicitly and not really sharing and not setting expectations of what they're doing. And then when you find out what the reality is, your happiness is basically negative in that equation.
Yeah, there's also some issues with people checking like everything he's done. Like I saw that one tweet because the price went down. People were like saying he rugged, and I checked his wallet, and you had all these like buy transactions and just zero sell transactions.
Hmm.
And it was just like, actually, you know what? He actually held this down quite a long
Yeah,
way. Yeah. The point about nuance I thought was interesting because that's obviously sort of a big potential issue with it with this sort of system. But I did notice with Bybit, I thought that counteracted that a little bit. Like, so obviously Bybit had a $1.4 billion hack end of last week. Um, and yet they were very sort of forthcoming about it, very transparent. They jumped on Nextbase very quickly. And actually, they got a bunch of positive reviews
hmm,
following the largest ever crypto hack in history. So I thought that was really interesting that there is definitely at least some nuance being applied in these reviews.
totally. I was happy to see that too. It's cool because I mean it goes back to what I just said, right? Happiness is expectations minus reality. Like companies that really go out of their way to set the expectations and over communicate, I think are often rewarded in the space. And I don't know why many don't. Like I think like the de facto answer for a lot of companies is to like don't say anything and try to figure it out and then come out with it. And I think they were rewarded for that, and it was cool to be able to see that. I would say like another interesting nuance that I noticed too was with Kaido sellers, like people who got Kaido and then like sold it immediately. Last week we saw a bunch of people like, "Wait, they need to go on a shame wall and all this stuff," and people were like shame tweeting at people that were perceived as sharing or shilling overly Kaido and then selling it on day one. And we didn't really see any negative reviews at all on Ethos about people who were selling Kaido airdrops. And while it might be my personal opinion that some people were over the top about it and may have deserved a negative review, most of the people that I have in mind didn't deserve that, and we didn't really see that. And so I think what I'm kind of trying to highlight is like with Ethos, because your reputation is behind it and because it's on chain, people are a little bit more thoughtful when it's not as like clear, like or overt that like someone kind of sold an airdrop and shouldn't have. And so while we saw some of those influencers get a lot of hate on Twitter, I didn't see that at all on Ethos. And so there's a potential like huge improvement, I think, of like separating kind of signal from noise and also creating its own kind of noise filter because people are a little bit more thoughtful about what they share.
Yeah. I mean, I think it speaks to the community that is on Ethos right now.
Hmm.
Um, and that's something that I think like you've sort of been cultivating with this is something I didn't realize when I started like because I played around with the platform a little bit recently. I invited a few people. I didn't realize when I was inviting them that their reputation scores would affect mine within like I think it's like 90 days or something.
Hmm.
Like it is written there, I just didn't read it. So like I wonder has that been quite instrumental to building out quite like a sort of diehard community
Hmm.
because people are only inviting other people that they think are sort of reputable. And then, like, I guess the question is sort of like down the line, when it gets sort of at some point, everyone gets in, right?
Hmm.
Then does it become a little bit harder?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I mean, a lot of people miss the invitation bonding system. We found like you build products and no one reads anything, so like it's really hard to communicate stuff like that. But the invitation bond, yeah, like Tim said, that you have 90 days basically when you invite someone that your score is tied to their score. And during that bonding period, it kind of discourages someone from like inviting a net negative actor, because if you invite someone who loses credibility in the first 90 days, then you're going to lose credibility too. And it is a really important mechanism that helps us like balance that, balance the whole system. Let's say that you invited yourself and other people didn't think that that was a good thing, you sibling and pretending you're someone that you're not. You could get negatively reviewed for that. You could get slashed for that eventually. And so the invitation system is really important in terms of defense against like, not inorganic growth, but like uh Sybil attacks, collusion, people kind of like inviting themselves 11 times. In today's day and age, you can spin up a million wallets with a little bit of code. We wanted to prevent that, right? The natural positive that we get out of that we didn't really intend is like, well, we have a pretty good set of initial users. And what I think about a lot is this concept of your first 1,000 fans. How do we go and meet the first 1,000 people that are really, motivated by what we're building, believe in the vision, align with it, are participating purely because they like believe in the vision for the most part. That's what we've seen so far. And then turn into the best referrers possible. They always refer and invite the best people. They're always tweeting about it or talking about it or sharing their score and promoting their own score. Like tapping into that first 1,000 people is really important to us. And so we've inherently limited the amount of growth that we've had through this invitation system. And I think it's worked really well. I mean, there's not a lot of exclusivity in crypto right now. Pretty much like go back to the NFT days. That was the last time we really had exclusivity in products or communities. It's cool to see how the exclusivity and us just having a strategy of trying to build those first 1,000 fans is working and like curating really good content. And the latter part of your question, like, well, what happens when like anyone can join? I think we would have to have a lot of confidence in the current content moderation mechanisms. So we'd have to have a lot of confidence that like slashing is working, or people are upvoting and downvoting things correctly, or people aren't colluding, or if they are, it's visible such that someone could call them out. And I think it takes a while to get there, to be honest. The easiest way to consider this is like you launch your own L1, you run your own servers. Eventually, you can start to have other validators. You pretty much run the validators for a pretty long time because you need to trust those validators to start. And so if you go back to the humans as validators concept, that's an important part of how we grow, right? It's very similar to like if you launch your own L1 or L2.
When do you anticipate making it so that anyone can join?
Yeah, I've talked about this publicly, and like it's not obvious to me that it will ever be that way, if that makes sense. I think the invitation system is a really important part of it, and potentially even underrated right now because people aren't really considering it. There is a lot of challenges with anyone building a product right now or protocol right now with people spamming you with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of wallets. And there is one really good defense against that. And it's like, well, human nature and inviting people and limiting those invitations and making it challenging. And so like for now, I don't really see a future. I think it would take a long time to get to that point. But it's not obvious to me. I would say it's like indefinite, basically. Like there's a world where it's possible, but to start, the invitation is such a critical component of how we grow that I don't see it happening anytime soon.
And there's something you said earlier made me think of a slightly sort of topical subject, which is there's this one, I think investor or maybe part of a group of investors, I think called Jeff A,
Mhm.
who used Ox.fun,
Mm,
um, and then has like a $1 million or something tied up there, and then it is in some sort of dispute. Um, and I remember Zach
mhm.
XBT saying you shouldn't have sort of used this platform given the history of the founders, and they were like, well, we didn't
Right.
know that. Do you think that if you sort of had these reputation scores, and I think one thing that's really I find interesting about Ethos is the fact you have a Chrome extension for Twitter, so you can
Mhm.
just when you're browsing Twitter, you have these scores on every profile.
Yeah.
Obviously, it kind of needs everyone to sort of have these reputations scores done sort of properly before it becomes like really useful. But like, if you had that and you had everyone using it, and potentially you had, I guess, context on the founders of a company or that sort of thing, do you think it could help inform people when choosing to use new platforms?
I mean, 100%. I mean, that is the vision, right? Is like whenever you look at the past of it's okay fun, right? I forget, or OX fun dot fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, like you have I don't think it's Ethos responsibility necessarily to be like this person is definitely reputable or definitely not reputable, but at the very least giving you insight into why. Like when you go look at an encyclopedia or a Wikipedia page, you like it's a little bit unopinionated there, whereas we're more opinionated, but having that information at your fingertips is super important. And so when I think about something like that, like, yeah, you kind of want to know who the founders are before you put $1 million into a protocol. And I think that the Chrome extension, which shows scores as you're browsing Twitter organically, is such an easy way to tap into that, right? We come to where you are and where you use your products every day. Like you're browsing Twitter and then you have some kind of social signal of like, oh, this person's blue or green. That means they're trustworthy. Ah, this person's yellow. Maybe it's a new account or maybe people don't trust it, and putting it right at your fingertips to go then look at their profile and see what other people say. Maybe it's someone you know, or maybe it's someone like you that has a bunch of reputation that you're like, wait, Tim said this about this guy. Like maybe I shouldn't like listen to what he's saying. I think that's really powerful. And the way that I would think about this is the next time you go bring a normie friend on and you're like, hey, yeah, you want to join CT, you want to like, trade on chain. You tell them about the Ethos Chrome extension. You're like, you need this extension to at least help you prevent getting extracted from someone. Maybe it's just a scam. Maybe it's just a scam tweet that we prevent you from seeing or interacting with. Or maybe it's people that have darker histories that you really don't want normie people kind of falling for the disguise, I guess.
Yeah. Talking of good Chrome extensions, the DeFi Llama one that tells you when it's like fake tweets.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's really good to have. And if there was another Twitter extension that I wish someone could build, it's the ability to write a note down when you block someone, so you remember why you blocked them. Because I had an awkward moment where I met someone who I either blocked or muted, and then I was like, I don't know why. But
yeah, it's interesting that happens in our Discord sometimes. People get blocked and then you're like, wait, why did I block this person again? And no, it's really interesting that you say that. And one of the things that I think we will see change this year specifically is I think builders will realize the power of Chrome extensions. Like they are the most underrated way to get your product in front of users where they are. Getting attention on your product is like impossible, right? Getting people to look at your product every day is really challenging. And that's one of the philosophies we've had is like go to where your users are. And I think you'll see more things like the DeFi Llama or Ethos or any other ones either start tapping into Twitter more, or even just writing over Etherscan and like without having to integrate with Etherscan. Like I think you'll see a lot of innovation happen at the Chrome extension level, to be honest.
do you think are there any risks with this if we start relying more heavily on Chrome extensions?
100%. Yeah. I talk about the risk of Chrome extensions all the time, and we have a Chrome extension of our own. And yeah, there's a ton people don't know about, right? Like as a Chrome extension, you can rewrite the entire website. You have to have the permissions to access certain websites, and you as a user should be cautious about those Chrome apps always. But they actually do represent one of the like stronger attack vectors for someone who's trying to take your money. And so like we will be introducing a lot of risk in the equation too, and in a very meta way requires a little bit of reputation behind it. And so I'm hopeful that Ethos can help in that way too, of like, yeah, these guys are reputable. They've built a Chrome extension. Maybe they had it audited, or maybe it's open sourced or source code available. But Chrome extensions can be very scary at times, for sure.
Yeah. Have you had it audited?
We have not had the Chrome extension audited, actually. We have to look in. I was going to go look at like who audits Chrome extensions. One of the things that most people like to do is just make the source code available for anyone to go publicly look at it. We haven't published it to our GitHub yet, but we have the source code available to anyone that requests it right now.
And then another thing you said just now, maybe question one thing. Let's say if someone who's like got a super high reputation score on Ethos leaves a review, and then someone with a really low reputation score leaves a review,
Mhm.
does the person's score affect sort of the impact of the review they leave?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a lot like ELO or the way matchmaking works in video games, but actually the inverse. So your score, if you have a really high score, and their score, whenever you're reviewing them, we measure the difference of that, right? So if you have a really top end score, let's say it's 2,600, it's like nearly the top, impossible to get that score. If you review someone who's 1,200, we look at the difference of that, so 1,400, and we say, okay, we will amplify the impact of that review because that person is reputable and leaving a review for someone who isn't reputable yet. Similarly, you don't want a bunch of people who are all neutral or like right around the beginning score of 1,200 to be reviewing each other and having an outsized impact. And so like they have a very minimal impact when the score difference is very small or negative. So if like someone who was questionable or untrusted reviewed someone who was super reputable, it would have almost nearly no impact to them. And so we use the difference in score as a really important modifier to kind of how reputation is applied, whether it be reviews or vouchers or slashes.
And then going back to like topical stuff,
Mhm.
with the Argentinian president launching his meme coin, um, would a reputation score have helped here? Or are they only useful on, I guess, the second meme coin
Yeah,
launch?
right.
Because he wouldn't have had like, I mean, he sort of his political reputation, right? But within crypto, he wouldn't really have had any sort of like positive or
No,
negative reputation until he does, effectively 100 million rug. And then you're like, okay, well now he has a bad score, but it's a bit late now.
it's a little too late. Yeah, yeah. No, I don't think we ever would. Or if you took someone like SBF, like there's no way that like Ethos would ever like prevent someone from something of that outsize of an impact where someone doesn't have that reputation before. And it's not even really the Argentinian president, right? It's the people behind the scenes that are kind of manipulating it. And they didn't really have much of a reputation before. It would have never made someone think twice about it. And it's kind of important to consider the differences between like the casino and the like more ideological side of the world. There will always be people that will gamble on it, even if someone does have a terrible ethos score. Like Dave Portnoy's score is not good right now. And if he launched something, they would still gamble on it. And that's totally fine. I think, yes, we would like on the second time, people would be more thoughtful, which is better than nothing, right? But I think in the future, maybe some of that information will come out earlier for people. And I think one of the worst things that we see extraction wise is it's the same people that are doing it over and over again. It's not the normie guys that come in like the Argentinian president. It's, people that you and I know or see in the space every day who are maybe posting contract adjusters daily and saying, go buy this thing. And no one's really done the research yet, but maybe they're selling on the side. Those are the things that I think are more tangible for us to help prevent future extraction from happening. But I would preface that again or asterisk that with like people are always going to gamble on stuff. And it's not our job really or where we think we play in terms of like defending people against themselves in the casino.
Yeah. I mean, SBF's a really interesting case example because let's say if Ethos had been like super widespread around that time, he would have
Hmm.
had probably a pretty high
Right.
reputation score with maybe a lot of people vouching potentially quite a lot of money for him.
Hmm.
And then obviously that would have sort of completely collapsed very, very quickly.
Hmm.
And I guess this kind of brings us on to the sort of I assume it's sort of you have kind of two products here. You have sort of
Hmm.
the reputation scores, then you have
Right.
Ethos markets.
Yeah.
And I think that's where it sort of comes into play here. So can you sort of explain like what Ethos Markets is and how
Yeah.
it like differs, but then also maybe connects to the main thing?
Yeah, so Ethos Markets is built on top of Ethos. That's how we think about it. It is a separate product. And what Ethos Markets is it's an idea that someone could have a token or two tokens that represent their trust. And it's two sides of a bonding curve, basically. One side represents trust, the other side represents distrust. And as you buy trust, the price of trust increases. And as you buy trust, the price of distrust decreases. And so we believe that this relationship between this like double sided bonding curve creates a lot of opportunity in terms of giving us signals that we've never had before. And so, like the SBF example is amazing because up until the point before FTX collapse happened, there would be a lot of people that probably would have happily bought SBF trust votes saying that they trust SBF and believe everything that he says. But similar to Polymarket, where in theory the truth is incentivized monetarily to come out early, if there were whistleblowers or people inside FTX that knew that like shit was about to hit the fan, they have a incentive to go buy distrust in a reputation market and get rewarded for that effectively. And I think that's a really interesting primitive that we haven't seen before, where we have the opportunity to kind of like bubble trust up or incentivize trust with regards to reputation through this new model.
Yeah, you could sort of do like an insider company takeover by just like
Buying all the distrust.
shorting all your like your CEO.
Yeah.
Um,
But that's what's interesting is like in that scenario, let's say that SBF was at 90% and therefore his, distrust shares were like at 1/9 of the value. If someone did slam or basically shorted SBF from inside the company and no one else knew about it, that would have created opportunity for other people to be like, wait, SBF went down to 70%. He's so trustworthy. I'm going to go buy him back up because I think 90% is where he's really at. And I think there's still opportunity to make profit. And so, like, it's very similar to Polymarket in a lot of those ways, where, like, if you truly think that, the outcome of something is going to be one way or the other, you have a financial incentive to bet against that or for that. And we just really haven't, like, with Friend.tech kind of had this, or like Tribe.run or some of the other social fi stuff from now, where you can buy people up, but they never had the ability to short them. And I think that's where it becomes really, really interesting in terms of yeah, like producing truths or having better insight into things that are happening before they actually happen.
yeah, I was just thinking that I was like, basically, you've built Polymarket for people.
Right.
Um, yeah,
The challenge is there's no outcome, there's no resolve, right? So that's one of the main differences in the things that we're trying to learn from right now is there's no like, oh, he's trustworthy by this date. It's just you're trustworthy or not. And so that's where we're trying to iterate and learn from right now.
I guess the combination of having the market and the reputation scores is sort of what works for that. Because essentially,
Yep.
it's Polymarket on based on reputation scores. You're betting on people's reputation scores, and
Hmm.
as long as the reputation score system it works pretty well,
Hmm.
then you can essentially bet on the sort of success and failure of people
Yeah,
over time.
right. And if you wanted to go like the nerdy route, the ground truth in the reputation market would be Ethos network reputation score. So if there's like a slippage between someone's score on network and someone's score on the market, that theoretically would present opportunity for someone. And so there's a lot of cool stuff that we're working on that is really like novel in a lot of ways, and we still have to go figure out how some of this stuff works and how it people do or don't react to news and buy distrust or don't buy distrust. But I think it's really fascinating what might come out of it.
Yeah. I was just thinking, like, what if you had, is there any way that you can have some sort of redemption system where it's like, I don't know, let's say if the vouching became the value
Hmm.
within the sort of each person, and you could sort of always redeem for a certain amount based on that. I don't know.
We've thought about it. No, no, no. It's you're on the right track. I would say like the way that we've thought about it is like different barriers. So like if someone went up to 80% trust, does the dynamics of it change, right? Is it that suddenly like shorts pay longs kind of thing in a normal funding model? Or is it that, hey, that guy doesn't get any of his incentives if he's at 20% trust anymore, and those get redistributed to people who are long on him or redistributed to people who are short on him. And so like there are ways that we can use the percentages kind of to drive incentive, but it's still early in how we're thinking about that because there's a lot of complexity there too.
Yeah, quite tricky to make that work. I was just wondering, like, because I was like, what if you had a case where you were like essentially betting against someone's reputation, and
Hmm.
then like they have a FTX or whatever, and then no one wants to buy
Hmm.
like, you bought these shares effectively super
Mhm.
cheap, and now you want to sell them super high, but no one's bidding. There's just no liquidity on that side.
Well, yeah, so what's interesting is the bonding curve. So technically the liquidity is as fast as you can get to it. And so like if FTX happened and you owned all of these things of distrust and there's this other people on the other side who own these things of trust, well, one, you wait for them to sell their trust because that would drive your profit up. And two, like you would always have liquidity to dump into in theory, as long as you were above or below that 50%. And so in theory, if you're buying one side or the other above or below 50%, you always have a resolution that takes you to profit if the liquidity dried up to zero.
What do you think of the idea of someone doing like a long con, where basically they
Mm.
spend like a year or two building up their reputation only just to like rug it in spectacular fashion and
Hmm.
make off with enough money that they don't care what
Hmm.
they've done? Um, do you think like, I don't know, reputation markets could aid something like that, or do you think you just don't see
Yeah,
it
it's
happen?
interesting. Like, I mean, a reputation market could present a hedge against that. If you were worried that someone was going to do that, you could take a hedge against their reputation in a way by shorting them. Um, I don't know. I mean, like the way that we've thought about ethos generally is like, yeah, someone could build up their reputation over time and long con you in the end and make a whole bunch of money by doing so. And people do that all the time already. I would say, like, so long as we are making reputation more valuable, if you have ways to get access to, things that are more valuable than whatever you'd rug for, which is hard to do in crypto for what it's worth. We want people to get to a point where they don't want to get rid of that social capital, where that social capital is so important that they would make more from having that than from risking like committing a crime and doing fraud to get rid of that. Uh, when I think about it combined with ethos markets, though, I mean, the thing that comes to mind mostly for me is like the information comes out earlier. You have the ability for that information to come out and get rewarded for it. And what's weird is like, in theory, the guy that's long conning could short himself on the market, but also that would be a signal to the market that like, hey, something is about to happen, so it's good. Like, it's a very weird thing to think about.
Yeah. I also like, I do feel like this is sort of one step towards the point where, and I've sort of felt we've been sort of trending towards this for a while, but it's never quite happened, where you have like almost every popular sort of person on crypto Twitter
Hmm.
having some sort of token tied to them.
Hmm.
Like you've sort of seen it sort of in over time where you've had like kind of, Friend.tech, you mentioned
Right.
Trevor.run,
Hmm.
um, even things like BitClout, I
Hmm.
guess. Um,
Or Cloud.me, that the one that launched recently too.
yeah, and like obviously you can have some people like if people just literally just launch their own meme coin,
Hmm.
yes, there's like you could say that's the token tied to that person, that's their official
Hmm.
token. Although we haven't seen much of that because I think people don't really want like
The reputational
a
damage.
yeah, I guess well the problem with sort of a meme coin is you can't really like it's not tied to your reputation. Like
Hmm.
you could have a really good reputation and your meme coin could just go to zero because just
Hmm.
no one sees any reason to buy it.
Yeah, right. Like, yeah, it's tough. I mean, what's funny is it is tied to your reputation when it launches, right? And then beyond that, it's not. And so that's why, like, I've thought about one of the interesting things that I think would be really cool with reputation markets is as a proxy to that type of a token. Let's say that you were a project founder and people that were in the space wanted you to have a reputation token to represent you as you were building your project, and it kind of gave other people a signal of like how much do this people trust this person, but also like gives people who don't trust you a chance to like have a say in it or potentially make profit on it, especially if you're someone who does have a history of doing things that the rest of society doesn't agree with. um so yeah, I mean, like, I do think that it's bad, personally, for people to have tokens. It doesn't make sense. Like, no one is ever going to be able to keep their token afloat. It really ends up being a one, like, it happens once and then it's gone kind of thing. I would prefer that people had reputation tokens, but they tend to make way less money on it than just launching, their own celeb token or KOL token or whatever. So anyways, we have to find that balance. But I think that shows like there's some interesting demand there of like, I want to either bet early on this person's reputation and make money on it, or I want to own a part of this person's reputation. Like, I thought that was cool. Like with Friend.tech as an example, I remember I bought ZachXBT shares or keys really early. Why? Because I believe in ZachXBT, and I thought like I would like to like not own a part of him, but like you know what I'm saying. Like feel like I could tie myself to his success somehow. I think that's what people are looking for, but we haven't really figured out how to solve that properly.
And what's sort of like next for Ethos markets? Like,
Mm.
how do you see that building out over the next like 6 months?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're thinking about is the resolution thing. Like a lot of people are kind of like, yeah, well, so does it matter if it resolves or how does it work? And so I think that's kind of more of a nebulous thing that we're trying to figure out right now. The other thing that we're trying to work on is making it way more social. I think the product right now is pretty standard. You buy and sell votes in people's trust or distrust. But adding things that of information into the equation, things like what has this person said in the past, or on Ethos Network has people vouch for this person or reviewed them, and kind of integrating it into a one place to kind of do all your research and understand exactly what someone's reputation is on the financial side, and kind of aggregate all of the information that possibly could have about that person as you're either buying their trust or distrust. Um, and then beyond that, I mean, we need to figure out, do we want to add different types of market making? Like, or we have an automated AMM right now. Do we want to add order books as an example? Or do we want to add perps as another example of a way like, right now it could technically support perps pretty easily. Do we want to make these tokens fungible and like you could go trade them somewhere else? Like, there are a lot of things that we could do on that front, but I think we need to see a little bit more traction in terms of like the problem that we're solving or where we think we're solving that problem. And so that's kind of how I think about. We have some short-term things that are obvious, making it a little bit more social, and then long-term things about how do we make the market a little bit more comprehensive or substantial or have some depth to it, if that makes sense too.
And how do you plan to achieve critical mass of Ethos more broadly?
Good question. I mean, it's a tough one because we're basically taking this approach that's like, let's just kind of grow slowly on Ethos Network. And Ethos Markets, we've tried to say, hey, we want to, like, anyone can go use it, anyone can go buy votes or distrust or trust. And then we have our Chrome extension, which literally anyone can use and get value from. I would say the way that I think about us getting to critical mass is can we, we get those first 1,000 users, really like the product, really believe in it. They're contributing, they're helping us understand who is trustworthy and who's not. And then how do I drive value back to those people, right? And not just in terms of like monetary value, but like how do I bring you more opportunities because you're reputable? How do I bring you deal flow? Or how do I bring you, communities that you can take a part in now? Or how do I bring you, or how do I go to another founder and say, hey, I've got this list of like 1,000 people that are all reputable, people know them, that tokens are going to good hands. Like you should probably airdrop the token to these people, right? Versus like whoever else. And so I think the second that we can kind of help drive value to those people that have reputation, that really kicks off the flywheel of growth. Because then people have a desire to become reputable and they really care about what is said about them because they see the opportunity that's created from it.
All right. Well, let's see how it develops. That's all we have for today. I want to thank Trevor for joining this episode. And again, thanks to our sponsor, Awaken. Make sure to follow the Crypto Beat on Twitch and Spotify. And subscribe to the Block Pods on YouTube. Our newsroom works tirelessly to get you accurate, informed crypto news. If you want to stay ahead, read the block. Thanks. See you next time.